Loading. Welcome to Access the Animus.
Hello everyone and welcome to the second part of the analysis of the Isu language of Assassin's Creed Valhalla here on Access the Animus. We left you, we're pretty sure, with a lot of questions about the first 7 files of the Isu language in the game, but if you thought understanding them was difficult, you'll be shocked at how complex the next file is. We're talking, of course, about the Canterbury document. In the video, we're going to translate every single bit of this file too, and we'll then move on to decipher the Isu numeral system based on the work of our good friend Sonny, and finally we'll move on to the final part of the video, where we'll have a look at the Isu script contained in the collector's edition of the game. Yes, several items of the collector's edition of the game contain bits and pieces of text and numbers from the Isu language without any translation, so we did our best with everything we learned and finally attempted to translate them too, and our conclusions might shock you. So once again, let's dive into this new chapter of the Isu language of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It will be the last one, we promise, at least for now. So, first things first, if you haven't watched the first part of this video, what are you even doing here? Seriously though, this video will take as given most of the information we found out about the Isu language in its first part, so we heavily suggest you to check that first before moving to this one. If you have seen the first part already though, let's start having a look at the Canterbury file. When we first saw it, we thought it was another kind of language, different from what we were analyzing, which for some reason the translator used to understand the Isu language. We saw he mentioned the Voynich manuscript, and indeed it looks similar to its text, so we thought it was somehow related to that. At some point though, we noticed that there were some words in there that contained elements we had seen in the previous messages already, like the numbers for example, and as such we took a closer look and guess what? What we were looking at was the Isu language, but this time it was handwritten. Thus, all the letters in front of us were different from the ones we had learned to use. We're gonna be honest here, we felt a bit disheartened at first, but then, hours later, we managed to find the correspondence between each of the various letters. We decided to be kind though, and to spare you with the explanation of how we did it and which letter corresponds to which one, also because the video will last 50 minutes and we like to avoid that. So we made our own transcription to the Isu alphabet we know, and we ask you then to trust our script and to keep in mind that there could be some mistakes, because in some occasions it was very difficult to recognize a letter from another as they are so very close to each other. And with that out of the way, we can finally start our translation. The first sentence is pretty simple because we have already found this exact same bit in the Cobustan file, and it reads "announced on this day", followed by, as you can see, a series of numbers introduced by a dot. We had some issues at the second sentence already because, as you may notice, in the translation we have 2 nouns, message and council, but in the Isu sentence there are 3. We will get to this later, as this will happen also at the end of this document, and we have an idea of the reason why it happens. Going back to the translation, we have the first and the second word with the same desinence and the last one with a different one. We decided then to attribute the meaning of message to this word and from the council to this one, leaving a question mark on the untranslated word. Moving on to the next sentence, in order to help the translation and make things easier for you, let's write the comma here. In this first part of the sentence, we can immediately recognize the subject because we know it from the Saga Stone file. This word means we. As usual, we search for the verb and we find the standard "to be" at the end of another word. In the translation, the verb is "cannot", but finding a "to be" construction here, we decided to translate it as "be able to", with the negation symbol in front of it, so "not be able to". There is another verb that we can recognize, and it is this one, with the construction we learned in the Xian file. This means "to do". Now, you might remember from our previous video, at some point while talking about the workers in the Cobustan document, we mentioned that we got confirmation of that meaning after finding a word in another file with the same root, meaning labor, and here it is, so this translates to "for the labor". We missed just one word that we have never seen before, so let's consider it as "ourselves", before moving on to the portion of the sentence after the comma. We search for the subject and we find our we as we did before. The verb was a bit more difficult to find because we got used to find it at the end of a sentence, but in this case it is in the middle of it. And as you can see, we have it in the first person plural present tense, as we learned again in the Saga Stone file. It translates to require. Again, what we saw in the previous files comes in our help, and so this word has the same root of the word strong from one of the Stonehenge files, and as such, we translate it with of strength, as it is in its genitive case. We can see a verb in its past participle form, and searching in the translation we find limited. Trying to complete the part of the sentence before the verb, we can see a word ending with this symbol, and you might remember from the previous video that we decided to intend it as the verb's direct object, and as such, in this sentence, it should be animals. We are left with two words, both ending with this symbol. The first one should be great, as in animals of great strength, and the second one should be sense, as in animals of limited sense. That surely is the meaning of it, but the fact that both of them end with this symbol left us a bit confused, as we had decided to give this symbol at the end of a word the function of an adverb. So if we stick to that idea, we should translate we require animals of strength greatly, but limited sensely. The meaning is there, but we're not completely sure about this. We are left with one word which also appears after the verb, and it should be but. Moving on, we have two other words with a genitive dissonance. They have a negation between them, and as such they should translate to of action, not of thoughts. As we learned in our previous video, the genitive case in the Isu language always stays in the front of the word it refers to, and so the last word should be freedom. The next sentence reads, to guarantee full control over their behavior. We know how to recognize to guarantee, and in fact, here it is. We then see the first and second words with the same dissonance in its ablative case, and we know the first word to be there as we learned in the Stonehenge file. So these two words read their behavior, followed by the preposition over. We just missed these two words, and they are both ending with what we believe to be another dissonance for the direct object. They are the adjective full in front of the word it refers to, which then is necessarily control. After this sentence, we have a list of the traits that these beings that the Isu are aiming to create must have, with must being a very important word in this, because as you will see, it will be repeated at the end of every single sentence. More specifically, we're not really looking at must as a verb in its active form, but once again we're looking at the passive form, present tense, third person singular. Moreover, the root of the word is the same as that of the verb require, which we just found a few lines earlier. Thus, the word must in this and the following sentences actually corresponds to it is required that. So, the subject is at the beginning of the first sentence, and it repeats as such in the following sentences as well. We then have it is required that, which is implicit, they. We notice another verb in the sentence which is to be tied to another word, so we have it is required that they are, or more easily, they must be. The word in front of to be, in this case, based on the translation, should be credulous, and the two words left are necessarily in matters of facts. As we will see in the following sentence, this word appears again, and that helps us understanding that this should translate with in matters of / for what concerns, and the last word shows a dissonance in the ablative case, and as such should be facts. The next sentence is very easy because apart from the different vocabulary, it is built in the very same way, and so the subject is they, the verbs are must and be, the adjective tied to the verb to be is suspicious, then we have in matters as we have seen before, and lastly, of imagination. Moving on, we are becoming pretty skilled at recognizing they and must, but this time we don't have the verb to be, and so we have to search for another verb. Here it is, third person plural, present tense. This is see. We got a bit stuck here because we couldn't recognize any other word, but then we noticed that this one is made up of a negation and the verb to be, and so we translated it as there are not. The following word looked like a preposition, and we decided to translate it as where, and the last word we were missing had to be patterns. Thus we have, they must see patterns where there are not or there are none. The next sentence, as per the translation, is, they must doubt correlations that go against their desires. With they must out of the way, again we look for the verb and we notice that there are two, but at the moment we need the one referring to must, and here it is, close to it, this is doubt. The other one, as you can see, refers to the word correlations. This verb is in fact go. Going back to the second word of the sentence, we see that it shares a common root with they, and as such we translated it with their. We don't know why it differs from the same there we found before and in the Stonehenge file, but maybe this is related to the fact that this is the adjective of a plural word. We're not sure about this though. However, if that is there, the next word has to be desires, and again after that we find the preposition for against. We just missed this word with the desinence that sometimes is used for direct objects, and that is, as a consequence, correlations. The next sentence once again contains they and must, but this time we have two words before it starts. We know one of them pretty well because we found it in the Serengeti file with the meaning of everybody. In the translation you can see in all, but that means all of them or in all of them. The second word is the preposition, and as such it is in. With that aside, the sentence starts again with they, and again we find must at the end of it. The verb this time is in the passive form, third person plural, present tense. This reads as be thought of. We also see two identical words that share the same root as we, and we consider them as our. The negation symbol helps us understand that this word must be children, and as a consequence, this must be instruments. While analyzing this, we notice something interesting. This word means instruments, but if you take a closer look at it, you can see the root of the word to do. We then thought of the Kshan file, the one with plows and axes and shovels, and interestingly enough, we see the same construction there, as if these words were meant to sound like tools to shovel, tools to plow, and in the Canterbury file, tools to do in a more generic meaning. Keep this in mind as it will be very important when discussing the text on the items of the collector's edition. We're left with the last two sentences about the traits the Isu are looking for in the creatures they are designing. They will build for us, harvest for us, toil for us. This sentence is pretty easy even though we see the verbs in the future tense in the translation, but we can't recognize any element in the Isu text to indicate it. We see the three verbs being build, harvest, and toil, and a word repeated 3 times, and with the root of we, which we translate as for us. We can see again the subject they, and the 3 words left in their ablative case are in order on the land, in the sea, and in the sky. The last sentence before completing this part of the document shows us they, as we are now used to, at the beginning. At the end of it, we don't have the word must anymore, but we can see a word attached to the verb to be, so, judging by the translation, this converts to our creatures. Again, we have to search for a verbal form we know for to use and to cuddle. We recognize the 2 verbs, but we still have to decide which is cuddle and which is use. There are several elements that can guide us. The first one is that we have a negation before one of the 2 verbs, and by looking at the translation we understand that the negation goes with cuddled. The second one is that we find again the word instrument, this time translated as tools. We can now easily give every word its meaning and read the sentence as, they shall be tools to be used, not creatures to be cuddled. At this point, we can finally dedicate ourselves to the final part of the document in which we can see the names of the Isu holding the mother, father, and voice titles at the time. In the first sentence, we find a word with the root of we and we give it the meaning of our. The second word is very similar to an expression we found in the Kabustan file in which it meant now. We can see the same now in the very last sentence of this document, but in this case, having a different last letter, we translate it as current. We search for the verb and we find it at the end of the sentence, third person singular, past tense, and as such, ordered or has ordered. By now we have encountered a few times the verbal construction for to start, and right in front of it, the direct object of the sentence, production. We're now left with two words and one of them is a proper name. We chose this word for the only reason that it ends with a desinence that we never met for any conjugated word, and as a consequence, this last word must translate as father. The following sentence is very similar to the previous one, and the beginning of it should read as our, current, mother, sackless. We can see two verbs tied to each other as we learned in the previous video, with a conjunction placed at the end of the second word, and we can learn they are third person singular past tense, so we have has presented and has compiled. Now, remember when we said at the beginning of the video that we had an implicit word in the sentence, a message from the council? We mentioned it would have happened again at the end of the file, and here we are. As you can see, we are left with two words to be translated. They have the same desinence and so they are related somehow, but in the translation we only have the word designs to attribute, and we place it on this word because, as you can see, it is a plural word. So what are these implicit words with the same root that do not find the correspondence in the translation? Keep this in mind again, as it will be very important later on. We move on to the next sentence, and again we have our, current, voice, Samael. As you can see, the word current in this case is missing a letter, and we don't know the reason for that, but we suspect it is to be related to the grammar gender, a bit like the neutrum gender in Latin, because if father is masculine and mother is feminine, voice could be both of them, and as such, neutrum. We then search for the verb, third person past tense, and we find has gathered. We read from the translation that we have to find required talent. We search for a verb in its past participle form for required, and we identify it in this word, which also checks with the other forms of require we found earlier, and what's left in the sentence is talent. The last sentence is very brief. We know this word from the Cobblestone file and it reads now, while the verb in present tense third person is begins, and this is the subject of it all, the creation. We can breathe now, we got to the end of the file. So yes, we were able to also translate such a difficult file, but we're still not done. It wouldn't be a proper civilization if it didn't have, along with its own language, its own numeral system, would it? Of course not. So yeah, we have numbers, as we have seen already, and of course they are encoded as the language is. As we saw in our previous video, in the Isu language the numbers are always introduced by a small dot, and as you can see from the example from the Cobblestone file, there is not a one-to-one correspondence between our number system and their own. In fact, the number 2194, which is made up of 4 digits, is encoded with 3 digits in the Isu language. In order to understand how to convert from our numeral system to the Isu one, we're going to be honest here. We based our work on that of a fellow member of the community and the Mentors Guild, that is Sunny or @Bloodkatze. You should totally follow her. In fact, she did understand that the numbers in the Isu language are encoded in the hexadecimal numeral system. For those of you who might not know, our numeral system, the Arabic one, is a decimal system, as it is based on 10 digits. The hexadecimal system, or hex, instead is based on 16 digits, which are most often represented by the number 0 to 9, and then with the letters A, B, C, D, E, and F. We won't bother you with more specifics, but suffice to know that there are some handy calculators out there that can convert any number from decimal to hexadecimal and vice versa. It is through one of those that we tested this hypothesis. In the example we mentioned earlier from the Cobblestone file, we had 2194 in our numeral system. That converted to hex is 892. So if this was correct, these 3 numbers of the Isu language would be 8, 9, and 2 in hexadecimal. In the same way, the other number from the Cobblestone file, 6 in our numeral system, converted to hex is, well, 6. Thus, this character in the Isu language would be 6 in hexadecimal. The Kshan file, for example, contained 3 numbers, 2800, 1750, and 880. 2800 in decimal is converted to AF0 in hexadecimal. Thus, these numbers in the Isu language would be A, F, and 0 in hex. 1750 in decimal is converted to 6D6 in hexadecimal, making these Isu numbers as 6D and 6 again in hexadecimal. Here already we can see that the theory works, as the Isu number that we translated as hexadecimal here is the same character that we translated as hexadecimal 6 from the Cobblestone file. Lastly, 880 in decimal is converted to 370 in hexadecimal, making these Isu numbers as 3, 7, and 0 in hexadecimal. And we see that once again the Isu character for hexadecimal 0 matches the same character that we just found again for the hexadecimal 0. So, with these numbers we have completed the Cobblestone and Chan file, but we still have one Isu document containing numbers. Yes, it's already time to go back to the Canterbury file. In the document, as you might remember, there was another date 24 of the year 2161 of the Isu era. Now, 24 in decimal is converted to 18 in hexadecimal, which corresponds to these two Isu characters from the Canterbury file. Once again, we can see that the Isu character for hexadecimal 8 corresponds to the same Isu number from the Cobblestone file. In the same way, 2161 converted to hexadecimal is 871, which makes these Isu numbers 8, 7, and 1 in hexadecimal, all three of which match with the same numbers we found in the Cobblestone, Chan, and well in the Canterbury file as well. You might have guessed it by now, our method works by comparing the various numbers and by using a converter, of course. But there's another method too. It's time to finally have a look at the collector's edition of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. What is interesting for us, and for the sake of this video, is that several items of the collector's edition of Valhalla actually bear on them some words and some numbers written in the Isu language. We're approaching the ending of our explanation. We have learned some elements of the language, we have learned the numbers, now what's left is to try and decipher what's written on the collector's edition. And we're starting from the part dedicated to the numbers, as it's fresher in our memory. As we mentioned earlier, there was another method to understand that the numeral system for the Isu is the hexadecimal system. In fact, looking at the inner side of the steelbook of the collector's edition, we can actually see 16 Isu characters, the same number of digits at the base of the hexadecimal system. As a matter of fact, this is like an ordered list of the Isu numbers and their corresponding hexadecimal numbers, from 0 to 9 and then from A to F. So yeah, looking at the inner side of the steelbook would have possibly given away that the Isu wrote their numbers in hexadecimal. What's more, all these Isu digits also have a code underneath them, which is basically their respective translation in binary, where lines are ones and dots are zeros. So we have 0 in hexadecimal being converted to 0000, meaning 4 dots, hexadecimal 1 being converted to 0001, meaning dot 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 line, etc., all the way to hexadecimal F being converted to 1111, meaning 4 lines. Again, that was the easy part. In fact, this is the collector's edition telling us how to read the numbers, but now we need to use them. In fact, on the side of the steelbook there are a series of Isu numbers introduced as usual by a dot. One must be read in this direction, the other in this direction. So, we wrote them down, converted all of them to both hexadecimal and decimal, and this is the result. Thus, we get to a list of numbers, but also to a full stop. In fact, the results currently don't seem to bring significant answers or meaning to these numbers. They don't necessarily seem to be dates or specific numbers. It doesn't seem to be a timeline either, so we believe we're still missing one last step to interpret them. What do you think? Can you help us solving them? Moving on to the text side of things, as we showed you in our previous video, we were able to translate all of these words. The word now on the prince, the two words contained inside of the steelbook in their ablative form and as such in this lake or beneath this lake or again through this lake, and lastly the two words on the CD which mean hidden and inside. And lastly, the final sentence, our final challenge before us, and plot twist, literally none of these words have been translated in the files provided in-game. But we didn't stop there, we actually tried to go the extra mile. So we recognize the verb to be at the end of this word. We recognize that this and this word are the same, only with a different dissonance. We also found out that this and this words share the same character, which we identified as an indicator of a direct object, but that wasn't enough. In fact, after a lot of trial and error, we noticed that this word has the same construction as the words shovels and plows from the Cobblestone file and the word instruments from the Canterbury file. As we mentioned earlier, we identified this part of the word with the meaning of tool. Further on, we noticed that this bit can be found once again in the Xian file as it is the root of the word lock. Plus, lastly, we also noticed the negation symbol. So, if our theory is correct, this word means tool, to, not lock, that is, a tool to unlock, meaning a key. Then we looked at this word, and again we haven't found any similar occurrence in any of the files. The only occurrence of this part of the word is on the collector's box, alone under the design of a crow, so we tried to break it up as we did for the word key, but we weren't as successful. The only element we could identify is the root of the word we/us, possibly something that indicates a group, a collective, which might or might not be related to the crow shown on the collector's box. We thought of clan or maybe family, but that's really our wild guess. Then we turned our attention to this word that appears twice in the sentence. Now, we found this word twice in the Canterbury file, and twice it did not have a direct translation, or at least wasn't mentioned in the translation we were provided with. In one case, this word is conjugated with the word council in the sentence "a message from the council," while in this other case it is conjugated with the word designs in the sentence "our current mother Saklas has compiled and presented the designs." So we tried to think of which word could be implicit in both sentences and could be explicit in this one, and as of now we thought of a possessive adjective like his or her or your, or more likely an article. If this was the case, we still don't get the reason why it should be written in some sentences and completely absent in some others. Thus, wrapping up everything we have gathered, we might have "your key is my clan," or "his key is his family," or more simply, "the key is the family." Hidden inside this lake now. That is very interesting in our opinion, because if our translation was even slightly correct, we might have a few interpretations for what this sentence might be about. In fact, if that word is a reference to a family, this might be tied to Loki looking for his family, which is heavily linked to the game's ending. After all, we're talking about a sentence written in a code that probably only hardcore fans would attempt to translate, positioned on a box that possibly hardcore fans and collectors might have tried to obtain. So it makes sense that it might be about a topic that is more aimed at longtime fans. But also not. Who knows really? We also thought this could be a reference to a clan, making the sentence more tied to Eivor, but then again, thinking of a message written in an ancient language about her clan hidden inside a lake would not make any sense really. We also wondered if this could be a quote from past games, especially the sentence pronounced by Subject 16 in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, "the key, her DNA." In this case, we'd have to think of this word as DNA, which doesn't really sound as a collective word, but as a fan, how could you not wish this to be correct? In any case, whatever this is, it is hidden inside a lake, and in our idea, this is not a self-conclusive message, but is actually a starting one. It is telling us that, whatever it is, it might be located inside a lake within the game world. So we're finishing this video like this, bringing this all to you. How many of you would be willing to help us find what this is and in which lake it might be located? Maybe it's a fool's errand, maybe it won't lead to anything, but even so, it wouldn't be any less crazy than trying to translate a handcrafted language that had been translated already, would it? And that was it for our full analysis and translation of the Isu language, its numeral system, and the messages on the collector's editions items, or at least 95% of them. We really hope you enjoyed watching as much as we enjoyed cracking the language, and we also hope those 2 videos will help any other fan understand the language, especially if more instances of it are going to come up in the future. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and to turn the notifications on so you don't miss any of our future updates. Thanks for watching and for following us in this crazy endeavor, and we'll see you in our next video.